Well, welcome back. So far, so good, right? Great lecture sessions, and the best part of the meeting was to kind of get to say hello and catch up with a lot of my wonderful patients and some new patients. That's the part which I like the most about these NCAN meetings. From a really inspiring last talk, Roger, fantastic, and this is why it's a good segue to the next section, that is nuts and bolts of clinical trial, because that's where we get our hope and inspiration from, that one fine day we will find a cure for all cancer. But for me, my world is neuroendocrine cancer. I do in my lifetime want to see that we change the outcome for this disease substantially. Why do we need to do clinical research in neuroendocrine cancers? You know, there was a time, fortunately this is before my time, where neuroendocrine tumors were considered benign diseases. That's actually the connotation the carcinoid with the benign came into. So doctors in 1970s, 80s, like, oh, you have carcinoid, it's benign. Resect it, go home. You don't have to, no follow-up, nothing. That's how misunderstood this cancer was. Well, let me show you some of these data. This is actually unpublished data. You're probably one of the first few to even see it. I've been working with American Joint Cancer Commission. It's a federally funded commission which studies cancers. And this is the committee which actually decides and develops guidelines how to stage the cancer, any cancer. So we are part of the neuroendocrine tumor committee. And you will see this data. What I want you to focus on here is, you see various plots. Those are different type of neuroendocrine tumors: appendiceal, gastric, pancreas, etc. They all look very similar. So you can just focus on one plot. Let's go with the second one here. Very clear. So all those lines on the top, those are stage 1, 2, and 3 neuroendocrine tumors. We all call them early stage neuroendocrine tumors. And these lines represent years or months. So what it tells me, 6 years later, majority of stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 patients are alive. 90% of those, okay? But do you see this problematic line, the fourth line, which is hanging down? Those are stage 4 or metastatic patients. Those, unfortunately, are majority of my patients in clinic. Okay? These are the patients who unfortunately have advanced disease. By the time we diagnose them, the cancer was already spread. Liver, bone, lymph node, could be any organ that would make it metastatic. And if you see those lines, at 5-year mark, only half of those patients are alive. That's why this is not a benign disease. This is a cancer, and it can kill. And this is the reason why we need to do better. Now, fortunately, in last 10 years itself, we have made a huge progress. When I was a resident in New Orleans, that's my early days in medicine training, and that's how I got interested in neuroendocrine tumors, because we had a very good program there. But I remember when patient had progressive cancer and they were not candidate for surgery and they had progressed on sandostatin, they had to go to Europe to get PRRT. From that time, the tides have turned. We are actually doing more innovative science, and we have access to the latest PRRT trials in US now, arguably even more than the Europe. And this all had happened in just last 7 to 10 years. So what are clinical trials? Let's kind of break it down, and then the later half of the talk would be about what are some of the interesting clinical trials that are available here at Sylvester, University of Miami, and nationwide as well. So oncology clinical trials are the research studies that test new medical interventions. Okay? It's a broad umbrella term. Could be a device, could be a medicine, could be some sort of a diagnostic picture. Each study tries to find a better way to either prevent, screen, diagnose, or treat the patients. Okay? Clinical trials compare new treatments to maybe the established standard of care, or sometimes if we are treating a patient who are refractory, several lines of treatment, there's no established standard of time, then unfortunately sometimes we have to compare it to placebo, which I personally don't like. I like all my patients to get something active, but it's the nature of the beast. To get a real scientific example sometime, and that's why trial is such a voluntary act where you donate your time in helping us figure out whether the drug works or not, and the only way to know is sometimes to compare it to placebo, okay? The eventual goal of clinical trial is to determine that these treatment approaches are either safe, effective, because there have been so many trials done in the past. If they're not done in the right way or there was poor science behind it, the treatments can actually cause more harm than good. So that's why a lot of my patients come to me, Doc, can I try this XYZ? And I usually don't say negative things about holistic medicine stuff. I myself take curcumin, but I'm not saying that cures the cancer. But a lot of people out there, they say take this, that, etc., that this will help cure your cancer without data. Everything that we prescribe in the clinic or talk about has data behind it. So if I'm prescribing somebody lanreotide, there's a rationale behind it that it has proven beyond doubt that it slows the cancer down. If I'm prescribing somebody short-acting octreotide or sandostatin, I can tell you the data, or PRRT, etc. That's the magic of clinical trials. This is how we get that data. So nothing is made up by me or by my clinical anecdotes or experiences, okay? Can you guys hear me? Oh, thanks for pointing that out.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not just here for good looks, guys. You gotta hear me. All right. Good. Thanks for letting me know. Better. So, what are the type of clinical trials? Some of you might know what these are. Actually, I see some familiar faces who are actually part of clinical trials right now. But for the unversed, trials are essentially of different phases. Phase 1, Phase 2, Phase 3, those are the main ones. And Phase 4, also very important. Phase 1 is usually first in human studies. We have a brand new drug, works in our labs, works in the animals. Now we got to test it in humans. And those are some of the earliest phase studies. High risk, high reward, right? So the kind of patient we test, we are in trouble. We need effective treatments, and we have exhausted a lot of standard treatments. But there's something really promising out there, and that's what we do in phase 1. So it's a smaller study. Maybe we treat 20 patients, 30 patients. And the goal here is to kind of prove safety, that we are not hurting our patients. So we go slow. We give a small dose to a few patients. If they do well, we give higher dose to the next set of patients, and then the higher, and then we kind of reach a plateau that, okay, this is good. So that's usually the phase 1 trials in most medicine, but in cancer, hey, listen, we have to treat the patient as well. We're not just here for experiment. So the secondary endpoint is usually and always almost efficacy. That is, are we helping the patient? Is there anti-tumor benefit? So the primary objective is safety, but the secondary objective is tumor efficacy against the tumor, okay? Once we have shown safety and efficacy, then we move to a phase 2, where we treat now maybe 50 patients or 70 patients and really figure out, is it helping our patients? Is it slowing the cancer down as compared to maybe the standard drug? And if we are getting those signals, yes, this is the game changer that we are looking for, then we test it in phase 3, which is the final verdict. If the drug shows conclusively in a phase 3 trial that this helps, then FDA usually grants approval, and then we have access to it. We will go over some examples. You already know examples. How many people here have gotten PRRT or Lutathera? Yes, so some hands there. That drug was the drug we were talking about that we had to send patients to Europe first. In mid-2015-16, we conducted a large international randomized study, phase 3 study, where half of the patient got Lutathera, another half did not. And it showed Lutathera work really, really well. right? So median PFS 28 months versus 8 months on high-dose sandostatin. That led to FDA to approve it, and 2018 onwards, our patients can get the drug here in the US. They don't have to go outside the country to get that drug. That's how powerful phase 3 studies are. They are practice changing. But it happens in stages, because phase 3 studies are also millions and millions and millions of dollars. Not only dollars, but it's the patient participation, much larger study. So before we get to that, we have to first go through all the hoops. As I mentioned, the two clinical main objectives, primary objective, secondary objective. So tomorrow, you guys are all coming from different parts of the country. You go talk to your doctor, hey, what are my trial options? Always ask them, what is the primary objective of this trial and what's the secondary objective? Because they need to fit the bill, okay? So the primary objective is, if it's a phase 1, I told you safety and dose finding. Secondary is it helping with quality of life, or is it an anti-tumor trial? So ask your doctor those questions. What is the objective of the study? The main take-home messages from clinical trial primer slides. One, it is a voluntary act, right? You don't have to feel that you have to do it. Just because your oncologist is presenting this option. When patients come to my clinic, I tell them more options the better, because no doctor can predict which treatment will work. And that's true for standard treatment as well. Okay? So we now have multiple treatment options: shots, sandostatin, lenalidomide, Lutathera, everolimus, Cape-Tem, XYZ. We also have a clinical trial. Okay? So more options the merrier, and patient needs to know that's a voluntary act. That doesn't mean that if you don't sign up for a trial that you can't get other treatments, but it's good to know what all options are available. Maybe the trial option is something that you are really fascinated by and you are convinced with the data behind it, and you want to consider that strongly. So you can have at least that conversation. But if you don't never talk about trials, then that's an important part of your treatment armamentarium you are completely missing out on. Okay? Another misconception about trial is, hey, is it too expensive to participate? How am I going to afford it? And all those kind of things. So luckily for us, clinical trials, the research component of trials is always paid by the sponsors. So if it's a government-funded trial, that I do a lot of NCI, or you and my taxpayers' dollars are paying for that trials. So the research part of it, be it the drug, the new investigational drug, or anything that we are doing as a part of research, is always covered. It doesn't get billed to you. The only thing that gets billed to the patient is as if you were not part of the trial, as if you were getting standard, routine treatment for your cancer, be it your doctor's visit, be it routine scans or routine blood work. So we try to make it ethical and also patient-friendly. Each trial has a unique design. As I mentioned, some trials might compare two effective drugs. Some trials might compare effective drug with a sugar pill. So you need to discuss those things with your doctor and see if you are comfortable with getting in those type of studies. A lot of patients who are here and parts of my study, you probably realize that a lot of my studies have effective treatment in both the arms. At least the standard of care in one arm. The other one might have standard of care plus something, because I do like to kind of have something on for everybody. Okay? But sometimes you have to open placebo trials, and that's what the nature of the beast is. Always ask your provider about relevant clinical trials available, not only in your location, but also nationally. And it differs from tumor type to tumor type. For example, when we talk about neuroendocrine tumors, there are plenty of places who manage these diseases. It's still rare, but we have net centers. So you don't really have to oftentimes go outside your state borders to find a good trial for your disease. But that might not be true for an ultra-rare subset of neuroendocrine cancers. For example, high-grade or poorly differentiated neuroendocrine carcinomas, where we routinely see patients from New York, Houston, or other parts coming in, because that's a big focus of our program here. So sometimes you might have to consider going farther, because those trials are very few and far between. Our eventual goal is that every patient has access to the most cutting-edge innovation closer to them. And that's the mandate from government and NCI, that we want more patients to be treated on clinical trials closer to them, closer to their support group and home. Okay? Because of these efforts in drug development in last 10 years, we have seen a lot of approvals. There was a time, remember, I told you one drug only, and then from there in last decade, look at the number of new drugs that we have available to treat our patients. None of these drugs, unfortunately, are curative, but they work and they slow the cancer down. If we can slow the cancer down, we can prolong patients' life. But incrementally, we are getting better because we are finding more and more drugs to treat, and hopefully one day we will find a cure. That's our eventual hope, right? So, in last 12 months itself, we've been blessed in our field that we have had 3 positive studies. It really takes more than a village to get to this point. Preclinical, phase 1, phase 2, and then phase 3. Years, sometimes decades worth efforts goes into it, and millions of dollars. So having 3 positive studies in the last 12 months is great news for our community. One of those is cabozantinib. Dr. Jennifer Chan from Dana-Farber presented this data in October at European meeting. They tested a pill form of treatment called cabozantinib. It's a targeted therapy. It's not chemotherapy. Consider it like a chemo light. Okay? So it targets certain pathway in the cancer, slows the tumor growth. So half of the patient got cabozantinib, other half got placebo. And the patient who got cabozantinib, their disease was stable for significantly longer as compared not. If you want to hear the numbers, 8.3 months versus 3 months in pancreas, in 11.4 months versus 3 months, in pancreas, and the extra pancreatic was so significant improvement if you were on the pill arm. Okay? Now this drug is not FDA approved yet for neuroendocrine tumors, but it is available in market. I've already started prescribing it to the right patient. I could not have done that if this study was not there, right? So another tool in my toolbox. So if my everolimus stops working, if my Lutathera stops working, I have another arrow that I can shoot these tumors with now, okay? So that's a great news for our community. The other breaking news is NETTER-2 study, which was recently unveiled in January at San Francisco by my good friend, Dr. Simran Singh. He was here yesterday with us for the physician part of the conference. So what are we seeing in this study? So you've heard this entity called high-grade neuroendocrine cancers. So we're not going to focus on neuroendocrine carcinomas, but the well-differentiated neuroendocrine tumors, and I know there are a couple of people here already. So that has been a critical unmet need. In fact, till 2017, we didn't even know there was an entity called well-differentiated grade 3. So if you had a grade 3 tumor, you'd always been bucketed with neuroendocrine carcinoma, but bad cancer. We now realize, no, neuroendocrine tumor grade 3 is a distinct entity. It's not as bad as neuroendocrine carcinoma, might not be as favorable as grade 1 and 2 neuroendocrine tumors, but it has its own identity. It's in the middle of the road cancer. And we are trying to find now ways to treat it. So you all know that Lutathera, the PRRT drugs, works really well in grade 1, grade 2, but we really didn't know, does it work well in grade 3 well-differentiated neuroendocrine tumor? And this study is a first of its kind study to test PRRT in these higher grade 2. So even grade 2, but the higher kind, the more than 10% Ki67, and definitely grade 3 neuroendocrine tumor. And what you can see, these 2 lines, the patients who got Lutathera, the blue line, did significantly better. Their disease was on an average stable for 22 months as compared to control arm who got somatostatin analogs 8 months. That's a huge difference, right? Almost 3-fold. So that's a huge progress for our patients who are unfortunately dealing with grade 3 well-differentiated neuroendocrine tumor, a step in the right direction. And then hopefully next generation studies will improve on this and make it even better. And I'll throw some light on that as well, because that's what you're here for, right? The latest and the greatest. Last but not the least, And this is a study which is very close to my heart. I'm personally involved, so I was chair of the steering committee for this drug. And this drug is tested a pill form of somatostatin analog. Now, how many of you here are on injections, monthly injections? Wow, big number, right? Do you like them, the injections? You like the drug, right? The great drugs, the game changer drugs, sandostatin, lanreotide, backbone of our treatment. But you don't like needles, right? I hate needles. Oh, somebody loves it. More needles for him. Carmente. So we have been trying to find ways to deliver somatostatin analog either through a patch or a gum or a pill. I'm kidding about the gum part. But a pill would have been a good, reasonable alternative. Eventually, a company named Crinetics, they're based out of San Diego, developed a pill called paltusotine and tested it in carcinoid syndrome patients. I've been part of their drug development from Kentucky days, and we opened the trial here as well. I'm very happy to disclose that the study is positive, and they reported 60% reduction in carcinoid syndrome, both diarrhea and flushing with the pill. These patients were either completely brand new patients or one who were on sandostatin and lanreotide, and then we took them off and the syndrome came back, and then we gave them pill, went away. So positive study, but unlike the other two studies I described, which were phase 3s or larger studies, this is still phase 2. So it still has to prove its mettle in a phase 3 study before I can start prescribing it. Right now it's not commercially available. But it's good to know that there is hope, and then we are working on something like that. And at the right time when the phase 3 opens up, we'll certainly invite right people to be able to benefit from this drug. So those were some of the key game changers in last 12 months alone in our field. This is a simplistic diagram I like to kind of, many of you when you are in my clinic, I maybe even have drawn it for you. So when I see a neuroendocrine cancer patient, I like to bucket into two major categories. NEC, the neuroendocrine carcinoma, the aggressive kind. NET, the neuroendocrine tumor, I won't say not aggressive, but less aggressive than NEC, okay? Because they are very different cancers. Just because they share the word neuroendocrine doesn't mean it's a day and night. To give you an example, NEC can double in size in 2 weeks. That's not the case with NETs, right, guys? We have some of us who have this cancer for almost 2 decades, right? So very different disease. So that is the first dichotomy, because you don't want to confuse NEC patients with NET patients, right? For today's talk, I would like to focus on NETs. It's very important, and when we make these conferences and talk to Mary and Bob, it's very important to kind of really focus on the right disease, because our talks are channelized based on that. And for today's talk, I think majority, if not 100% patients, we are well differentiated NETs. So for future discussion for this talk per se, we will be focusing on well differentiated neuroendocrine tumors. Well differentiated neuroendocrine tumors also is about 80% of neuroendocrine cancers. So the NEC is rare, fortunately rarer. So today's talk, NET. And my last segment of talk is going to throw some light on what's the latest and greatest that is happening in the US. Hopefully that will change in future how we treat neuroendocrine cancers and maybe the next breakthrough. A lot of these breakthroughs hopefully will come in theranostics or radiopharmaceuticals. So what are radiopharmaceuticals? You've heard a little bit about it. These are the class of drugs where we have a peptide or a tumor targeting molecule, right? For example, neuroendocrine tumor. You all know that neuroendocrine tumors are unique because they have somatostatin receptors on its surface, right? So if this is a ball of tumor, it has somatostatin receptors on its surface. What if I have a drug that likes to join the somatostatin receptors? Like if receptors are like lock, I have a key. Sandostatin and lanreotides are your keys. Those are somatostatin analogs. When we inject them, it go and bind to somatostatin receptors. But what if I make the key radioactive? So when we inject this drug, it's not only going and binding to these receptors, but binds there and then radiates it, right? That's what's called theranostics. So we have a drug that we inject, and then we do a scan, and we get to see where all the tumors are. So you've probably all seen your dotatate PETs. All those black spots or the spots that are lighting up, those are somatostatin receptor positive tumors. And if you have them, then we give you Lutathera. It's the same drug, but a little heavy duty radionuclide, the lutetium-177, and goes and binds to those same spots and radiates them. Okay? So that's called theranostics. A lot of really good trials happening in the theranostic space. The first few trials I'll talk about are the patients who have never got PRRT, because some of you might have already gotten it. We have some tools for you as well. But let's talk about if you never had this. You're just starting your journey. You on sandostatin or lanreotide, and now the tumors are not responding to it, and you're right for PRRT. What are some trial options? Now, my good friend Dr. Eloisa Suarez and Dr. Habday, they're leading this national study. It's available in various cancer centers, so you don't have to go to Huntsman in Utah to get treatment. Those are principal investigators. So hats off to them for all the efforts they put together to put this study. So this study is testing in pancreatic neuroendocrine tumors. So you've probably heard of a drug called Cape-Tem. It's a chemo pill, very effective. We also know Lutathera, very effective. But which one should go first? Now we have a problem of plenty. A decade back, we had problem of no treatment. Now we have problem of plenty. So which drug should go first? We are trying to figure out those answers. So this study is going to put half the patients in Cape-Tem arm, other half in Lutathera arm, and whosoever wins, probably that drug will go first, and then the next one. That's usually the concept here, okay? So good study. Another good friend of mine from Dr. Tom Hope from UCSF in California put together this study called, it's testing Lutathera in lung nets. So highly understudied patient population. About 20-25% of our neuroendocrine cancer patients, it starts in lung. It's not majority, but about 1/3 or less starts in lung. And we don't really have good data to support if Lutathera works equally well in lung nets as how well it works in, for example, pancreatic and GI nets. So this study is the first of its kind study testing Lutathera in lung nets. And what I like about this study is the patients who will not get Lutathera, they'll still get something very potent and effective, which is already FDA approved, called everolimus for lung nets. So this is not a placebo study. We are going to be opening this very soon in Sylvester as well, but it's a national study. It'll open at various cancer centers. So definitely keep this in your radar if you are a lung NAT patient. The other study is an interesting study testing another drug which is very much like Lutathera. And the reason why I like Lutathera, a great drug, but we need more drugs. More is better for consumers, right? So this is just a very similar drug to Lutathera conceptually. And we are waiting for the readout for this particular study. It is testing Lutathera-like drug, the PRRT drug targeting somatostatin receptor in higher grade neuroendocrine tumor. And the comparator arm got either different type of standard cares, including chemotherapy. So very, very important study. Now, how many of you heard about alpha PRRT? Any hands? Yes, some of you. Okay. Somebody's reading news. Well, there's a lot of buzz in our world, in neuroendocrine cancer world, about alpha PRRT. So all those PRRT studies that we talked about so far, we're using lutetium-177. It latches onto the cancer, radiates them. But radiation is not one kind. There are different types, alpha, beta, gamma. So the Lutathera or lutetium-based radiation is beta radiation. Alpha radiation, on paper, is a more potent, more energetic radiation. Also, it has smaller penetration depth, which could be a double-edged sword. So the smaller penetration or the depth means that less of the normal tissue around the tumor will get radiated. But it also means that would it be equally effective in treating larger bulky disease, right? So that's why I said. So it's yet to be known, but it's just another form of PRRT. Dr. Delpasan and their group tested this alpha PRRT drug in few patients in a phase 1 study. And look at this one of the examples. Of course, you have to take it with a grain of salt because this is still a phase 1, small sample size. But all those black dots are the tumors. Can you see them? No. Those are kidneys and bladders. Those are normal black dots. Okay, don't confuse them. And that's spleen. But most of the disease gone. Very, very profound benefit. Okay. Now what we are going to do is we're going to see if this works out equally well or even somewhat like this in larger studies. Okay, so there is a lot of alpha PRT hope, and I hope not hype about this. We'll be opening some alpha PRT studies at University of Miami as well very shortly. We are also making strides in pediatric neuroendocrine tumors. So that's another hat I used to wear in Kentucky. I don't have any bandwidth left, so I don't see pediatric patients anymore. Maybe in future. So during residency, I did both internal medicine and pediatrics. But I do feel for this community, neuroendocrine tumors don't elude any age group. So I have seen young kids, 4-year-old, 10-year-old, 18-year-old with neuroendocrine tumors. We were part of this international collaborative trial which tested Lutathera in pediatric nets. I'm happy to announce I think this trial is done accrual, and we're going to see how it reads out. But really hats off to the sponsors to kind of studying this rare entity in pediatrics, and hopefully we have some options for them. Okay, what about patients who've already been through PRRT, right? Are we forgetting you, or we still have something in store for you? Well, worry not. This is my own study. Me and Dr. Simran Singh from Canada put together this international cooperative group study. So this is both you and my taxpayer dollars funding this study, whether you like it or not. So you all heard how beautiful Lutathera PRT drug is and is able to control disease for many patients for sometimes several years. But imagine you got Lutathera, 3 years later the cancer started growing again. You will automatically ask me, Doc, this drug works so well for me, I want to try this again. Unfortunately, the FDA approval is only for one time, 4 doses, right? And it's an expensive drug. Each dose can even cost 50 grand, just the drug part of it, not even like the other fees. So we wanted to test, can we safely re-challenge with Lutathera? And we designed this study called NET Retreat. Cool name, right? I came up with that. So patients who've been through Lutathera are going to be randomized to either everolimus, because remember I told you I hate placebos. I want something effective for every patient. And so either they get everolimus or they get 2 additional doses of Lutathera, which are provided to us by the sponsors. So there's no worry about access to Lutathera. And the patients who get randomized to everolimus, and let's suppose it doesn't work, patients can then qualify to get Lutathera. So it's a win-win either way for both the arms. And this study is now up and running. We are really trying to encourage more sites to open this study so that our patients can get access to these drugs. And if this study is a positive study, imagine that will give access to all the patients all over the US for additional Lutathera treatments. So wherever you are, I would encourage you to lobby for me and tell your oncologist, can you open NET Retreat? I think the community will be very grateful to you, and I personally would be. All right, so the other treatment in this re-challenge or retreatment phase is testing an alpha PRRT, patients who've been through regular Lutathera-based treatment, can they get alpha PRRT at re-challenge? We just heard, I think last month, the very new news, because of the production issue with alpha PRRT, right now enrollment is on hold. But it's important for you to be aware of this study because in future that might change and they might restart again. So there are some options there. So I put together this graphics in my free time, which I don't have anymore, unfortunately, after we had the baby. I draw and do some graphics designing. So I try to showcase, now PRT is now mainstream. We don't have to send patients to Europe or India to get Lutathera. But should we stop there? No. The bigger problem lies underneath the water. Even if PRT works really well, we can make it better. Can we make it twice as better, 3 times as better, right? One of the issues with PRT is that it stabilizes the tumor. It rarely shrinks the tumor. The response rates means how many patients we see shrinkage on the scans after PRT. It's only 14% per the FDA insert. That means only 14% patients shrinks, which is okay because majority of patients stabilizes. That's the main goal. We don't want our tumors to grow. But can we increase that shrinkage rate? Because there are patients who have large amount of bulky disease and they're symptomatic from that. And it would be wonderful if our treatments can really shrink the disease. So we have that challenge and then how do we sequence? Does PRT go first or CAPTEM and all sort of those questions? And last but not the least, these drugs are relatively safe. Your doctors would have talked to you about that. But we can always make them safer. They don't have 0% side effects, right? So can we all work together towards making these drugs even safer in future? So those are our challenges. So this is where the next generation of studies are happening, and that's where we are primarily investigating. This is a study by Dr. Kennecke in Oregon area, good friend of mine. He's testing Lutathera plus a drug called cabozantinib that we just talked about. The drug cabozantinib by itself is effective, is now going to be available to everybody, but they're trying to combine it with Lutathera and see if it can make the combination even more potent. So it's a phase 1 study. The other studies by our good friend Dr. Del Rivero from NIH, they are studying another very novel combination with a PARP inhibitor. Now this drug called PARP inhibitor really gained attention in breast and ovarian cancer world, but we are trying to see whether this drug can enhance Lutathera benefits in neuroendocrine tumors. The drug that I've personally been working on is called triapine. It was first developed in Yale several years back. They tried it in various cancers, didn't work out, until somebody figured out that when you add triapine to radiation, it works like a charm. They tested it in gynae cancers. That's where I got my idea when I was at NCI as a fellow. I was like, we have Lutathera now. Why don't we combine it with Lutathera? Because that's a radiation-based drug. So we got a grant from NIH, NCI, tested it in our mice models and preclinical models. And what you see here, when I combine triapine to radiation, these tumors, no growth at all as compared to other groups. You see that? So of course, then we led the first in human study. And we designed that people get 4 doses of standard Lutathera. As you can see, those radioactive IV bags, each dose is every 2 months for total 4. But we gave patients 14 days of triapine pills. And what we found was preliminarily, not only the combination was safe and patient could stay on it, of course, there will be always toxicities, some nausea, some fatigue, but they were manageable toxicities. But preliminarily, it looked like we had doubled the responses from that 14% to almost double of that. And now the next phase of the study is testing in a larger, from phase 1 to phase 2, where we'll be treating 100 patients. We are leading this study. We got a big grant from NCI. And you'll be happy to know this study is already open in 14 different places, including MD Anderson, Northwestern, all the top cancer centers, okay? And we here in Sylvester are the lead site, okay? So big thanks to all of you. Our program is already kind of being among the top in the US. And this study is pretty straightforward design. Again, with my team, I don't like placebos or sugar pills. So patient will either get Lutathera, which is already a very effective drug we know, and other half will get Lutathera plus this triapine pill. Once we have treated these 100 patients, we will know whether triapine truly is as effective as we think it to be. So time would tell that. And we are also studying a lot of promising blood tests in this study, because one of the things we don't have right now in our field is good, effective, accurate way to monitor the disease. So we are dependent on the scans. Chromogranin has its flaws, serotonin has its flaws, all these blood-based biomarkers are not accurate. On the same day, if you do these tests, it'll be all over the place. So we are dependent on scans. But our patients live for years and decades, and we want to see if we can find a way to monitor the cancer without doing so many scans. So we are testing some new type of blood tests, which if it turns out that it's equally as good as scans, then that might offset needs of doing very frequent scans. So a lot of science, for example, in 2022, we discovered that this particular marker called HPG-AT could be potentially a good biomarker in neuroendocrine cancer. So it was found to be elevated on there, and we tested 90 plus cases and compared to almost 300 plus normal patients without any cancer, and we showed that no, it's real. Now in these trials we are going to study it serially and see if the HPG level correlates with the scans. When the tumor shrinks, it comes down. If tumor grows, it goes up. And those are the kind of innovations that we are designing in our clinical trials. The last but not the least, the other drug that we've been working on right from its inception is a drug actually comes from Germany, a German Merck, called piposertib. When I started working with this drug, it didn't even have a name, called M3814. We got a small grant from NIH to test it in our mouse models. We started our journey just like that. Beautiful preclinical data, which then allowed us to convince government to give us money to test it in humans. So a phase 1 study was done, and it was open at 6 different sites. Huntsman Cancer Center in Utah, Ohio State University, Northwestern, us, City of Hope. So all the studies that I'm talking about, it's not just my personal experience. These studies are experiences coming from all these really good and renowned centers, because nobody likes bias. These are my babies, so I might be, everybody needs to be good. I pick the strongest and the best candidate, but that's not the case. In science, we like to be unbiased. So these are multi-center studies, and we really follow through the protocol, and everything is by the books. And I'm very happy to tell you that in Montreal, just a few months back at our national symposium, we presented the data. We have confirmed the recommended phase 2 dose. We have also confirmed that it can be safely combined with Lutathera. What we don't know yet, because it's too early, we just finished enrolling last patient a couple of months back, and we have to give them a year to see how everybody's doing on this trial before we can comment on, are we improving on the success of Lutathera by adding this pill called piposertib. With that, I'd like to conclude, but the real take-home message here is not to overwhelm you with all this information. Know that clinical trials is a very potent way to treat cancers. Always include trial participation in a discussion with your physician anytime you need a change of treatment to see if you're a candidate, and have a good, thorough discussion. Is this a right fit for you or not? Because eventually, one fine day when the breakthrough comes through, it will not come through magically, it will come through clinical trials. With that, thank you so much for the opportunity.